Our platform, Motivity, serves as the backbone for data collection across almost 500 amazing organizations. And since joining Motivity in 2016, I've been humbled to watch how this company just keeps getting better and better. We have such an amazing team. So if you're curious, sign up for a demo on motivity.net. I'm just going to go ahead and leave that there in the chat. But often Motivity provides CEUs for presentations on Behavior Live. However, our future-focused presentations don't really qualify. But we are confident your time is not going to be wasted. One more thing I want to mention, if you want our presenter or our host to address something specifically or answer your question, then you use the question button kind of at the bottom. Don't put it in the chat. You can vote for questions there, and you can just put anything in there that you want. And then you can use the chat to just chat. So on to our featured presenter. Patrick Faga is the creator of FirstWork, an app that digitizes DTT from setup to reinforcement. He's a behavioral scientist with an MS from the University of Pennsylvania. And before FirstWork, he worked as a behavior technician, noticing the inefficiencies with typical flashcard-based lesson delivery. FirstWork was launched in 2024 after extensive beta testing, and it's now used by thousands of BCBAs. So I want to turn it over to Brian, who's going to start us off. Brian's Motivity's Chief Creative Officer, and he's going to be your host. Take it away, Brian.
Thanks, Christy. So yeah, the goal of Future Focus webinar series is to shine a light on some of the new pieces of technology that have been hitting the market in the past couple of years, and give them a way to kind of tell their story in a long form way of communicating their contributions to ABA with their software, and giving them the ability to kind of dive deep into their backgrounds, their values, their mission, things like that. So that's why we're here. Without further ado, Patrick, nice to meet you. Tell us a little bit about FirstWork.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of Motivity, and so it's really exciting to be here and have the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing at FirstWork. So I know some of the high level has been covered here in that introduction, but FirstWork is a DTT lesson delivery platform that we recently developed to make it easier to deliver lessons using the tablets that technicians and BCBAs always have access to anyhow, so that you can start to reap some of those benefits of digitization when it comes to the actual delivery of lessons. Coming from that technician background, I noticed how difficult it was to kind of get started with this technical type of learning. And also that it was very difficult for parents to continue with this learning at home. So our hope for the platform is to make it a lot easier for everyone in the field to deliver really effective lessons that are exciting for learners, quick and highly personalized, so we can maintain all of those great things about DTT that make it a really useful pedagogy, while also moving into the kind of future of value-based care and direct delivery and capture of some of the things that are going on in ABA. So wonderful to be here and have the opportunity to share a little bit more about what we're doing.
Very cool. So taking a step back, Christy mentioned that you used to be an RBT.
That's right. Yeah.
So how long were you doing that, and then how have you progressed in your career till now?
Yeah, so I became an RBT actually during COVID while I was finishing up my undergraduate degree. So I have a background in behavior neuroscience and was always really interested in both the clinical side of the world and the research side of the world. And as we all know, COVID really kind of threw a big wrench in really everything we're doing in the world. And so I found an RBT role. It was something that I wasn't really conceptualizing initially, but I have family members who are on the spectrum. And so it was something that I was passionate about personally and thought it would be something really worth exploring. So during that period of time, while I was kind of in essentially a gap year before I went to graduate school, I was working as a technician. And it was a really, really interesting experience, especially given a lot of those supports that were in place kind of in a traditional center-based context. And when you have a little bit less sort of variability in the environment, weren't there because of COVID. And so getting to see, I think the space at that time was a really interesting time to sort of see the things that work really well, that even when you have, very impacted systems, these things worked quite great. And some other things that didn't transfer as well without all of the robust supports that are traditionally available in more normal times. So it was a really interesting time to see the space and kind of just see what ABA was about and the things that worked really well and things that were a little bit bigger of challenges.
Yeah. So you were an RBT was that all telehealth?
No, so it was in person, in home actually. So I was we were working in clients' homes actually at that time.
Yeah, a lot
Okay.
of people did actually do that during COVID because the way that, we weren't ready for,
Weren't set up for it. Yeah.
yeah, and you just needed to be in the home. So thank you for doing that. A lot of people put themselves out there and did that.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
it was a really
Mhm.
interesting experience, and kind of bringing up the telehealth component. That was honestly one of the big things that had me start
Mhm.
thinking about FirstWork was that, my undergraduate studies were obviously impacted by COVID as well. And within, I think it was about 10 days, we were back in class on Zoom and, able to continue doing a lot of the things that we were doing. And obviously telehealth was able to pick up a lot of the, kind of difficulties with providing services in ABA, but it wasn't the same level of seamless transition that was experienced in higher education and even in kind of
Hmm.
traditional school-based. It was sort of clear that some of that technological infrastructure that has, fallback plans and sort of things that you can plug in when, everything kind of goes awry, weren't really in place in the same way in the field. So it was a really interesting time to see that, and sort of prompted me to start thinking more about the type of technology that's available in ABA and why it would be important to kind of make certain things a little bit more accessible in a digital format, so that in these situations, there might be other options.
So what was the ultimate trigger that made you say, you know what, I'm not going to be an RBT anymore. I'm going to build software.
So yeah, so it was a combination of a few things, but I would say that the real ultimate trigger was seeing that there were things that I was thinking about that might be impactful, sort of more on a systems level, that I wanted to kind of apply my time to, as opposed to the direct clinical work, where there's, a huge value in that direct clinical work, but there's not that many people who have sort of a more technological background, or a background that kind of lends itself to building systems like this. And so
Mhm.
seeing that I had kind of a unique background and that kind of lent itself a little bit more towards that systems type work, it felt like something that was a little bit of a better fit for me. And I ended up getting into a graduate program that was really focused on systems design and sort of higher level behavior analysis, focusing on things like policy. And so being in that environment and having that opportunity to sort of apply some of the things I had seen in the applied behavior analysis world, through the lens of a behavioral scientist, behavioral designer, felt like a really interesting combination. And the
Mm.
kind of impetus, I guess, in sessions, more than anything else, was that I kept on finding myself in the same sort of loop in a lot of cases, where you'd be doing these DTT lessons, and a lot of the time, DTT is something that's not one of the preferred activities for learners, and so you need to leverage some
Mhm.
powerful motivation to kind of make that experience worthwhile for kids. And very often, if you do a preference assessment and you see, what are kids really interested in, tablet time is like way off the screen, and then the next thing is kind of down here.
Yeah.
So in so many cases, it was possible to really create these exciting learning experiences by making tablet time a bit of a part of that experience in terms of what the reward could be. And so I saw this with so many different learners of different profiles, that a lot of the time that was a reward that could really motivate learners, but was also very difficult to manage, where, transitioning away from device time is difficult because it's such a fun thing for learners. Kind of providing those digital rewards just wasn't very practical in a lot of senses, and often led to carry on effects that were not really worth, dealing with. And so in some cases,
Mhm.
that really potent reward was sort of pushed to the side as something that people didn't want to leverage, because it was, really difficult to make fit, because we work in the physical environment and technology is in the digital environment, and kind of never the two betwixt. And so a big focus of mine was thinking about ways that we could structure the digital environment in a way that's similar to the way that we structure the physical environment, so you could start
Yeah.
to have that kind of overarching control over that side of our environment.
Let's
The
back up a little bit.
entire device. Right.
Yes, the
Yeah.
device. Yeah,
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah. That's
back
cool.
up a little bit just for our viewers and whoever. DTT stands for discrete trial training.
that's right.
So just in case there are people out here who are like, what is this DTT business? It's like R2D2? I don't know. No, but DTT stands for discrete trial training. It is not the only thing that we do in behavior analysis.
Sure, of
It's
course.
just one thing that seems to work very well with somebody who's not picking up a concept. And that is to go through continual trials of what we would say multiple exemplars of items. Like you can see the apple up there. Maybe we'd have a green apple and a yellow apple. Those would be multiple exemplars. And so often it would be kind of like having somebody label, or what we would call tact, an item. So I just want to just make
And is
sure that
that
other people understand that in
is
case.
DTT always in an environment to where you try to remove all distractions? Is that
No,
Like
I mean,
usually in a small room, or can it
so
be like natural environment? Like I
oh,
guess what's the difference between NET and DTT, or can they overlap?
yeah, the difference between, I mean, that would be DTT and NET are often set up as kind of opposites in a way, and we're natural
Hmm.
environment. But I would say no. I would hope that a good behavior analyst would notice that you still need to be distracted when you're learning sometimes, so that you learn how to deal with distractions.
Hmm.
So I would expect that your product is not also related, and sometimes you would do sort of almost a discrete trial in the natural environment because it fits in there. So I would expect that you are not only in that DTT world.
Hmm.
But Patrick, I
Yeah.
don't know, where do you go with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's, kind of with the question of like the difference between DTT and NET, I think that there's, obviously a huge linkage, and both of them have, very important roles in a session. And with DTT, a lot of the time it's a little bit more focused on, kind of discrete practice on something very specific. So the cool thing with DTT is that you can get really personalized and really specific on very niche things, kind of conceptual points of understanding about, like what an apple is, for instance. And so, there's a huge relationship between the two things. But one of the things that's kind of unique about DTT is that it kind of reduces some of the environmental factors, where in NET, the environment is, kind of live and real, and as everything is, where you can kind of reduce some of that with DTT. But definitely, the whole world is full of distractions and things that kind of pull us away from attention. So, it's not
Yeah.
that DTT is entirely distraction free. Nothing really is.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, that all makes sense. Um, okay, let's dive into the slides. Let's see what you got. I'm excited to see.
Yeah, let's take a look. So
Surprise.
this kind of actually responds a lot to what we were just talking about here about the personalization of DTT lessons and of rewards, and sort of what the difference is between a traditional DTT lesson with flashcards and what you can do in the digital context. So to share a little bit about all of that, there's a whole process that's been developed over decades, about ways that you can personalize DTT lessons. There are lots and lots of levers that you can pull essentially to personalize a lesson so that it matches the needs and profile of a learner. Some of the things that you're often going to be modifying are things like the field size. So how many answer options are presented for a given trial? Typically more is more difficult. The similarity of distractors. So there's the correct answer if we think about that framework before, where the apple is matching to the apple. But there's also all those other incorrect answers, and those have a real impact on what the process of finding the correct answer might be. So you can imagine a situation where the apple is paired with solid colors. And so in that case, that apple is really distinct compared to the other answer options. So it's a bit easier to find. You could also imagine another situation like one that Christy mentioned, where perhaps there's a color-based component to it, where the apple is red and all the other answer options are red foods, for instance. And so, relying on the fact that it's food and then it's red might not get you to the correct answer. You really need to get some of those distinctive features of an apple and that concept form to kind of be able to make that discrimination. So distractor similarity is another feature that can be modified in both physical and digital lessons. And there's some cool components with going digital on that front. You can obviously present lessons in various different ways. You can provide all sorts of different kind of prompting. This is typically done by an instructor in person. You can provide all sorts of different types of error correction styles and levels, which is also typically moderated by the instructor. And of course, there's a huge amount of things in the world. So typically you can, kind of structure a DTT lesson to be focused on just about any concept. So you really need all of those goals and multiple exemplars. So we're not just teaching, this one specific instance of an apple is what an apple is. It's really more about that concept and kind of capturing some of those components of apples. And then, of course, we have rewards as well, which are sort of the key moderator of whether or not an experience is really engaging and motivating in a lot of cases for learners, because, it's a learning activity and not typically sort of a fun activity. So having that component is really important too.
Mm. Very cool. So this is all. So I think what I saw when I did some initial research is that you have kind of like two sides to this app, maybe more. But the one I saw was the clinical side, but then there's also the integration with the operating system as well,
Right.
right? To give focus time, I guess, on certain things. Is that right?
Yeah. So to provide a little bit of color there, since I know we kind of jumped right into some of the details on FirstWork, there's
Yeah.
two real components to the app, as you're saying there. There's a DTT framework that makes it possible for you to deliver lessons on a tablet, so learners can answer those questions right there. You collect all the data automatically. and you can customize it to match the needs of that learner. And so that's a really big project and is sort of, it compartmentalized in a sense, and you can just deliver those lessons. You don't necessarily need to access our focus and reward system. But the other side of FirstWork, which is really the novel and kind of special part about the application in our mind, is the way that we structured the digital environment to make it more conducive to learning and to be able to leverage some of those digital rewards that kids already know and love. So the way that that system works is the application can limit designated fun applications, like, for instance, YouTube Kids or a game or a puzzle app or anything you can download from the App Store. So you can select all these apps and say that these are the fun apps. And during lessons, those applications aren't available. So one of the hard things with digital is that the digital environment is more full of distractors in a lot of senses than the physical environment. There's tons of fun stuff two keystrokes away from the lesson that you're doing. So kids have a hard time kind of staying focused on the one thing that they're supposed to be doing. So the application can kind of streamline everything into this is really the only thing that is available right now. And the cool thing with that is that you can then deliver access to those applications as a reward after lessons on a time basis. So you could, for instance, answer that personalized DTT lesson and then afterwards earn a few minutes on your favorite application like YouTube Kids or anything else that you typically enjoy. So that's a really unique part of the app that makes leveraging digital rewards a little bit more feasible and also makes the learning experience a little bit more independent compatible. So in a context, you continue learning at home, for instance, it's something where you can remove some of the need for all of the technical understanding of exactly how we're going to do the prompting, exactly how we're going to do the error correction. That can be programmed by a professional and just shared with you. And then in terms of kind of creating an experience that learners will engage with, the digital structure that we have helps with kind of keeping the lesson a little bit more focused while also providing a digital reward that kids really care about.
Do you have kind of the rewards built in, or is it always that external app? Like I was just thinking about Headsprout, Journaling. I don't know if you were familiar with that, but my kids all learned to read on Headsprout. And there were those kind of reward videos throughout. Now, two of the kids really liked those videos. One of the kids did not like those videos, so it wasn't reinforcing. But still learn to read. It's okay. They all read now. But so do you have that kind of internal when you get it right?
Oh, yes. So you do get immediate rewards within.
You get that immediate kind of.
So there's a huge element of that responsiveness so that as you're making progress, you can build up that behavioral momentum and know when you're making correct answers and incorrect answers and kind of get shaped towards the correct answer. But what you mentioned there about your children and how some of them really love the rewards and others love them a little bit less, that sort of links up with our core philosophy on rewards and motivation, where we believe that it's not really our jurisdiction to make something that we think is fun.
That you think might,
there's billions of dollars spent on creating entertainment experiences, and we as an education company are never going to be able to make a reward experience that's going to compete with a great YouTube video or your favorite game.
Too individualized.
So I think a lot of the time having those built-in gamification features are really great, especially when you're talking about a more local level, so you can build up that momentum. But when we're thinking about the ultimate rewards and the things that kids are working towards, I think this is a setup that is a little bit more flexible and has a bit more autonomy, because you can, of course, also cash in that time however you'd like. So maybe you want to watch your favorite song. It's 2.5 minutes on YouTube, and then you've got another 2.5 minutes to do a puzzle. So you can spend that time however you'd like. You can change your mind, so if you decide, actually, I want to do the puzzle and that's all I'm going to do right now, you can just decide to do that. So it creates a little bit more autonomy so that you can sort of find that reward that's most appropriate for you and not be as sort of conscripted into a reward experience that you might not really actually enjoy, especially given that you're just a few keystrokes away from something that you probably do really like.
What almost sets up a negative reinforcement situation where you're escaping the program rather than you get anyway.
No, I totally know. It's like if you we all have different preferences, Halloween style. We all have different preferences in candy. If you give me a big box of hot tamales, I might be like, well, that is candy and that's awesome, but I don't really like hot tamales that much. And so, and then you're sitting next to, your siblings and they've got all the fun stuff you want. So, I think that there's definitely something to be said there about, kind of the comparative juxtaposition and kind of being so close to something that you do care about and having something that you care a little bit less about is not necessarily ideal.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of handling that problem. Are all the rewards, so one more question, then we'll go to the next slide. I promise. Are are all the rewards that you have kind of triggered based off of time? Are they all on the device, or can you set it up to be external? Like, hey, we're gonna go play with a, I don't know, Slinky or something.
No, totally. Yeah.
Um,
You can definitely set it up to be external. And a lot of the time, what we see is, depending on the context, folks will either use the kind of digital rewards more or less. So parents often are big fans of the digital rewards. It makes it so that the learning can kind of fit into the traditional screen time. And that's sort of what kids might expect to do between 5 and 6 before dinner. So in some contexts where you're sort of in a digital environment already, usually that's what people want to do. But in a clinical context, of course, like your professional is really fun. You've got all sorts of fun stuff going on, and you don't necessarily want to spend a bunch of time on YouTube during that period of time. So in those cases, a lot of the time, folks will leverage the the focus feature, so you still can access the fun stuff and kind of get off track. But after your lesson's over, you're able to earn something that's off of the platform or off the device entirely. So yeah, playing outside, doing whatever you like to do. So it's definitely compatible with sort of traditional lesson delivery and more center-based context where often that isn't the desired reward every time. And then it's also really easy to use in contexts that are a little bit more independent and a little bit more digital, where it sort of fits very nicely into that context.
Cool.
Yeah. So you want to move on to the next? You can chat a little bit about a topic I'm sure you all are very excited about, which is data and data fidelity.
So we know it very well.
Yeah, I know you do. So to kind of frame this topic, I think that there's sort of a trend that's been happening in ABA for the last few decades, really, especially as systems like Motivity have come to prominence and more folks are able to accurately capture and store all of the data that they're collecting. It's just become easier to collect high fidelity data. And so the bar has sort of been raising over time. But when we think about something like a DTT lesson, there's both sort of high level data on like, okay, well, what happened? How many did we get correct? And how many did we get incorrect? And that's obviously a very useful piece of information, but it isn't the richest piece of information about what's going on. There's a lot of context that is also there that's just typically impractical to store. So if you're imagine you're doing a flashcard based lesson, there's a lot of things that you're doing at once. So you're setting up that lesson properly, which requires some of your focus and attention. And of course, every trial, you need to do that again. So very regularly, you're thinking about the proper setup for that trial. You're accessing your visual stimuli and making sure that those are ready for that next array and able to be shuffled out when they're needed to. You're providing prompting and error correction on every trial, which also, of course, requires that you're paying close attention to the learner and the answers that they're responding, the answers they're providing. You're collecting data in some mechanism or some way or another. So somehow you need to transfer the results of what just happened into something like Motivity, where you're able to say like, okay, we got 8 out of 10 today. And then, of course, this whole time, you should be engaging with your learner and being there to support them and just kind of make the experience fun and engaging. And so given you're doing all of that, it's really hard to do much more than to collect like, this is what we did, and it was this correct or this incorrect. But there's tons of other information that's really rich that could help with just your programming and your understanding of what's happening. So for instance, using a digital system, we're able to track the latency of your trials. So every trial, it's automatically collected. It took a quarter second to answer this question. So it might be the case that there's one day where, for instance, the scores go way down and you might look at the latency and the latency is double what it normally is. So you could pretty easily say like, this looks more like an engagement issue as opposed to a learning issue. So you can start to add different layers of richness to your analysis just because you have more data available to you. And then, of course, there's the question of how often was it actually 7 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 and not 8 out of 10, or, and there's a legitimate error being collected there. And the research on this is a little bit sparse, and the context matters so much. Like the year that this was published and the systems available has a huge impact on the data collected. But just in terms of kind of broader history, some publications in the about 10 years ago showed that when folks started to use data collection systems, they were able to increase their fidelity by around like 30%. So big increases by being able to automatically, or not automatically, but digitally record progress and have a nice framework for that to make it really easy. But despite that, in recent studies a few years afterwards, it looks like there are still tens of percents of errors in a lot of cases for lessons like DTT. So it's not 50%, but it's also not like 1% or 0.1%, where just very rarely there's an error. Like this is something that happens pretty regularly in sessions. And being able to have direct data capture where you do the trial and it's just recorded that it was right or not right, and here's how much prompting happened, here's how long it took, here's what that lesson looked like. These were the details about it. It makes it so that you have that certainty that the data is collected, and you don't need to worry as much about, kind of that component of this process, making it possible for you to focus a little bit more on what you're doing and worry a little bit less about just kind of memory, basically, which is really what's being asked when it a lot of the
sounds like you capture fluency and acceleration as well.
Yeah, we pretty much capture just about everything that we can, and that's one of the big kind of focuses that we have right now, is just increasing the richness of each data point based on everything that the system could capture, and making it easier for secondary analysis to happen there.
So are you also like giving them the ability to chart it? Like, can they see the data afterwards okay, cool.
Yeah.
Is it logarithmic? Is it acceleration chart, or is it?
So this is the standard display is progress over time. We're building in a sort of standard acceleration version right now. Actually, we've been working with a group that's very focused on the chart. So we love
that. But there are people who are very diehard acceleration.
We heart the chart. So if anybody's a chart harder out there, we agree. But so right now our standard display is sort of a progress over time. You do have the raw data that you can access to convert that into really any sort of analysis that you'd like. And one of the things that we're doing as more teams are using the app in sort of more well-defined specific ways that we can sort of accommodate directly, we're improving the data views and just sort of the ways that you can represent those lessons. So it's even easier to access the data you need immediately.
Sure. Awesome, man. This is cool.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay, cool. So another thing that's really interesting about physical lessons, and if we just think about like what is a DTT program, right? DTT program is kind of a concept at the end of the day, or a protocol, and then there's materials that can be used to deliver that. But it isn't that one-to-one of a thing. So if you have a BCBA who creates a DTT program and shares it with another BCBA, they're not going to deliver the same exact lesson that you delivered for a couple different reasons. One is there's that component of the telephone game where people might just kind of mistake things. And as the kind of information gets further away from the person who created it, there's just more opportunities for mistakes. There's also the materials that are being used. So if I have one deck of cards and you have another deck of cards, the images that I'm going to use are just necessarily going to be different. So the types of images that you can use are also going to be very different. And so all in all, like sharing a DTT program with somebody else is really not very easy with physical cards. Like if you wanted to have somebody deliver the same exact lesson that you did, you would need a very detailed protocol, a lot of training, and then presumably to ship them the actual materials that you were going to use, and be very detailed about how things are going to be set up. So it's not that you can't share protocols and programs, like it happens every day in ABA, but it is hard to be 100% confident that the lesson that you created is the lesson that's going to be delivered, for all of these practical reasons. So one of the cool things with a digital program like FirstWork is that you can create custom programs, save them, and then share them directly with other people with all of the settings and details attached. So if you're a BCBA and you build a really detailed program and you have like a lot of very specific components that you'd like to see there, you can then send that to somebody else, like an RBT or a parent, and they can run that program the exact same way that you created it. Just simplifying that process for the folks who are delivering the lesson, and also increasing that, essentially sharing fidelity between the BCBA and the people who are running the lesson. So makes it a lot easier to just kind of transfer that information from one place to another so that it will be delivered, exactly the way that you set up, as opposed to there being a little bit of variation there.
Very technological of you, yes.
Thank you.
So is that I'm assuming that's only within the organization itself? That's not across organizations, or is it?
You can share it with anybody with FirstWork, yeah. So if somebody else has a FirstWork account, you can just copy a lesson code, share it to them. You can even do it offline. You don't need to have your accounts linked up in any special way or anything like that. Cool. Super easy to do.
Yeah, that's really nice. So I guess towards the end, I usually ask like, what's in your roadmap and what's your plan and what's next and all that. But do you see like a marketplace kind of thing happening?
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because one thing that BCBAs are so smart and creative, it feels like once a week I hear something where I'm like, that's a great idea. I don't know why we didn't think about that. But something that some groups have been doing who have been using FirstWork organizationally for a few months now is starting to build out their own program repositories off of FirstWork. So they'll create the custom programs and then save those custom programs so that they, for instance, have like 10 programs that they really like for safety signs. So like, this is a great introductory safety signs program. Obviously programs need to be edited and tailored to learners, but you can get a lot of those core details in place and then just ship them off to another person and they can provide that kind of final detail. So it's a really cool kind of direction that I think that we're heading, where we'll be able to create custom programs to work with common assessments, for instance, as well as programs that are sort of ubiquitous and are very common. So I think safety signs and community helpers are a good example of that, where lots and lots of learners for very functional reasons work on those kinds of goals. And there's only so many safety signs out there. So, it's a fairly constrained kind of analysis. So it's really helpful to be able to sort of truncate some of that initial setup and focus more on the personalization as opposed to just like, let's put together this program with the right targets.
But actually, I would see it being more leaning more towards that for PCBAs, because what we used to do is what you're seeing right here is print things out on cardstock and cut it out. And after you've done that, you're like, I don't want to do that again.
Oh yeah.
So I'm just going with the same sign, I'm like, I'm not getting more.
Yeah.
But if it's digital and also sharing, I'm like, oh, now I need two because I got two kids on this. They can't run it at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
we will.
Yeah, I appreciate your pictures with all those scissors and cardstocks.
Right.
I see the cards. Yeah. I still have left over.
Yeah, no, I feel like a lot of people sort of shiveringly resonate with those sometimes, where they're like, oh man, the laminator.
The laminator, yeah. Or you had to go out and buy those expensive ones, but also like the telephone and the cards that we used to, it's like nobody knows what that is anymore.
Yeah. And then if one gets damaged, like, what are you going to do?
I know. Yeah.
You have a whole new set, or are we just back to laminating, so yeah, it's definitely.
Out of curiosity, like, have you seen a shift? I mean, I'm sure you have, and this is for you too, Christy, but with the introduction of the iPad, right? The tactile thing of holding a card, right? Or holding an apple, or having a flashcard that was red or blue or whatever. Like, what's the transition been like there? Like, do you think something was lost, or do you think actually something was gained because their attention span is way more focused now?
So I can take that just based on what we've sort of seen. And one thing which I think is really, really interesting about digital versus cards is that there's been a lot of, so I guess taking a step back, FirstWork is not the first digital DTT platform that's ever been created. There were platforms that were based on computers before. And part of the reason why there's been RCTs on these, and one of the kind of big commentary points about those applications is that, kind of similar to manipulating cards with, and just that's kind of a contrived and non-naturalistic thing to do, using a mouse, is not something that we're born with as a skill. And so if you have sort of tactile difficulties or motor difficulties, any of these things, that's a real big limiter. And even just like connecting between that the mouse is moving, there's a lot going on with the mouse. So while putting it on the screen is a really cool idea, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to easy interaction from the learner and the ability to form those connections.
Right.
When I do X, Y, and so one of the things that's kind of unique with using an application instead of using cards, and what we've seen in our research study, and really just kind of across the board with folks who are using the app, is that there are a lot of learners who had tactile difficulties or some sort of problem with the DTT with flashcards process, where, whether it be sort of a scrolling behavior or just any of the various things that are really common with DTT with cards. And it's just not as easy to interact with and responsive on like an immediate level. If you do it on like a computer with a mouse or do it with cards, you just don't get that immediate feedback. But when you're using an iPad, it's a really unique platform where it's kind of uniquely built to be very responsive. So like you touch the screen in the right place and then something can happen immediately. And there's a big difference between like immediately and being able to build connections around that kind of level of consistency compared to like with cards, where it's a little bit less immediate and it doesn't kind of tell you, like somebody, there is obviously, feedback provided, but it's not on the same kind of level of immediacy.
It's not, the feedback response doesn't have the consistency of technology. That's interesting. Yeah.
We do positional prompting. So like sometimes, we would be, one of the earlier prompts would be kind of, the correct one would be closer to the child. Is that something you do on the
Currently, we don't have positional prompting in that setup. That is one that we've heard about. But yeah, we don't have that exact setup. We do have a number of different prompts. Typically, we're using kind of visual interface as our primary. So we do highlighting around the correct answer. It's sort of one of our primary prompting structures. But the arrangement and specific
Right,
location is
right.
interesting one.
But it also sounds like too, because and Brian had mentioned this is the 2D replacement. This is not the 3D replacement. That's actually a separate,
Yeah.
like a holding of an apple would still go on, I would
Oh, for
think.
sure. Yeah.
This is, and we never would use the card for replacement for an apple. You'd do 2D to 3D and then
Yeah.
Which I guess you
Gotcha.
really you can kind of do though. You can do 2D to 3D because you can still have the 3D and then make the selection on the 2D.
Yeah. Yeah, technology. So interesting.
Yeah, no, that has been in. So I alluded to it a little bit before. We teamed up with a university and an ABA center to do our first efficacy study, and that's been really the most interesting thing I think that we found is that we've seen this in anecdotes, but when you kind of do it in a study context, it's just kind of even more interesting. Is that there are quite a few learners who really did not do very well with cards, but can pick up on something like this really quickly. And so I'm not saying that every single learner it's going to be like some grand slam, the greatest thing ever, but there definitely are cases where there are learners who that other setup just didn't work for various reasons. A lot of it's like the attending and where you need to be. Maybe it's tactile, maybe it's visual. Like there's a whole host of reasons why it might happen, but it is definitely just really interesting to me that the digital can be such a difference maker for some kids where, it just fits a little bit better, I think. And also, of course, kids are spending so much time on devices. Like if you've ever seen an AAC user, for instance, a lot of the time you can be pretty blown away where you're like, wow, like that learner really has a great understanding of how the tablet works. And so a lot of the time, by the time kids are in ABA, that's one of the skills that they've really kind of honed is understanding, like the haptic touch interface of an iPad. So I think it's a bit, like nobody teaches you how to point at a card and know if that's correct, but you kind of will naturalistically essentially learn how to deal with haptic feedback interfaces.
And if the reinforcement is delivered more immediately and more quickly, then you're going to pick up that skill more quickly.
Yeah, it's the same thing with like the error correction system, where like a lot of kids are able to kind of learn the error correction system and kind of know what those what it's telling them, and it's just because it's so consistent. I think that can kind of help with there's a big difference between like a half a millisecond or like a half a second and a full
second. Of course.
It's a
world. Well, especially with superstitious behavior too. So if you did something in between,
right? Yeah. There's all those things that can happen.
Yeah. Okay, what do we have? One more?
Yeah, we've got one more real slide, and then I do have a cheating slide on the end with just some information. But so to kind of wrap it all up and talk a little bit about what this can mean for centers and responding to something that Christy definitely mentioned with the laminator woes is that being able to deliver lessons on a tablet has real significant impacts on ABA businesses because BCBAs spend a ton of time on preparing materials. Typically, folks will spend upwards of 2 hours a week if they do a lot of DTT. And so these are like the most well-trained.
And it's unpaid.
it's often unpaid or it's admin.
Yeah, you can't bill you can't bill insurance.
You can't bill insurance. So so it's either something that is sort of happening at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, which certainly is not contributing to organizational culture, or it's something that you're paying for as a practice owner, and that's just kind of coming directly out of your pocket. So the process, as we mentioned, you got to go online and find all these images. You have to print them out, you have to cut them, and then you have to laminate them. And that's not even speaking about the quality of that process. Like you can do that much better or much worse. But just the whole process, no matter how you do it, just takes a lot of time, and it's not a preferred activity for BCBAs. Somebody once told me a joke that they felt like they got their degree in printing and laminating. So it's definitely something that's top of mind for some people. So what we found with organizations that are using FirstWork is that using FirstWork in lieu of physical cards in most contexts, of course, there are contexts where you might use physical cards anyways, but using it as the primary typically costs about a quarter of what you would generally spend on preparing materials manually. So it's a very significant saving. And we've also heard that because the lessons are really quick, it's often possible to just do a lot more in a shorter period of time. So you're able to do more lessons, kind of make it a smaller part of sessions where typically with an app, like you kind of break out the application, present it to the learner, they do their questions, they get their reward, and then you can move on to something else where, in a general session, you're moving to the table and, there's like a big transition happening there. So it's a little bit more agile in sessions and it saves teams a lot of time. And that time can turn into, other things that you could do to scale up the impact that your organization's having. So, once you're able to really get this under your belt and not be spending all of that time, it's possible to even take on more clients. So it's something that can make a big impact for teams, and both on a culture level and on a direct savings level.
Um, I just had something I was going to ask you, and it just slipped my brain. Um, oh, I wanted to the what kind of customization? This is like, I guess, not really on topic at all, but it it came back up when you were talking about triggering rewards. Is that what type of like customization do you have when it comes to giving a reward? Like, do you have to get 3 right in a certain amount of time? Are there like constraints there, or is it just one after the other?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So right now we're working on having some new variability systems so that you can kind of have the amount of reward be more directly linked to your performance in that lesson. But currently the default setup is it's essentially completion based. So if you're assigned 10 questions, once you complete those 10 questions, you can access the
Got it.
period of reward. So, it's more about kind of like finding those correct answers. We have an errorless system and everything. So, it's really more about like kind of getting to that correct answer and forming those associations to get the correct or to get to your reward period. But that is definitely something that we're working on sort of on our broader roadmap, is making the sort of reinforcement component a little bit smarter. So essentially, if you are really doing amazing right now, like you should be able to know that and be rewarded for that kind of in a special way.
Right.
And currently it's a little bit more kind of straightforward. So that's definitely
Should
something.
be a bigger reward if you, yeah, absolutely, fewer prompts.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if you had like a large lesson, right? You could split it up into 3 different sections,
Oh, that you can.
3 rewards or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, that part you can do currently, but at least in terms of like.
Okay.
I really like where you're going with that. Yeah, because we've always been taught that you need to make it bigger if they're getting to it independently. It should certainly be bigger independent than it would be a reinforcer if it were prompted.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what else? I guess since we're on the topic of ideas and roadmaps, like what do you see as next?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is my favorite thing.
Brian's
because this is
question.
like,
It's a good
well,
one.
this is what you really see. Yeah, I mean, because we have a roadmap, it's like 5 years long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's always
And
always
let's see
interesting
how
to
to
hear
slide
like,
to answer you. I love it. Like,
oh, look at that.
Yeah. So I definitely
important
cannot give you a.
Brian his question.
Yeah, it's not a 50-year plan or even a 5-year plan, but I wanted to share a little bit about what folks can expect kind of in the next quarter or two here. So, and I can speak a little bit more about just kind of our broader visions as well. But in terms of things that are coming like right around the corner, we are going to be publishing that initial efficacy study soon. So that's going to be a really exciting moment for us to just be.
Where are you publishing that?
TBD. I don't want to share too much.
Oh, okay, of course.
We're keeping it under wraps. But
no, that's good. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked.
But yeah, so that'll be coming out right around the end of this calendar year, and we're very excited about that. So that'll be a great way to be able to just sort of showcase with a little bit more data and sort of a third-party perspective about how this impacts learning. And we're mostly focused on it in more of an independent learning context, which is really cool. So we're looking at something that's a little bit closer of an analog to being able to use it at home, so that you can continue working on those goals without the need for that sort of direct instructor kind of touch on every trial. So that's going to be coming soon. We're also always working on increasing the number of goals and customization options inside of FirstWork. So we talked about a few that in the customization options department that we're working on right now. And then in terms of goals, right now we have thousands of images for matching receptive, expressive, feature function class, and then a wide range of academic goals as well. So really quite a comprehensive set for those, but we're working on increasing the academic goals as we've started working with more special education programs and folks who are kind of focused on academic goals as well as really buffing out all of the content library that we have. So you can really capture the ability to sort of represent just about anything in the natural environment. We do essentially have that currently, but I mean, there's a lot of things out there in the world, so always more things to include. And then, as we mentioned as well, supporting more assessment-based programs directly, given that so many folks are kind of drawing from those when they're working with the application. So those are all things that are going to be coming in our newest updates. Next, in the next sort of Q2, Q3 sort of range, we'll be working on making our lessons a little bit smarter. So this sort of with the variability that we talked about, that kind of falls into that category, and really just being able to respond a little bit more to the things that are happening on a systems level. So, the system is able to detect whether or not, you're making progress towards the goal. Maybe you need more prompts. And so just being able to build in those sorts of suggestions and quick changes that respond to learners as things are happening, to take away a little bit of the burden of the programming on professionals and have a little bit more more support there, especially because typically you're not like looking deep at the data while you're running the trial. So nice to have suggestions about how maybe this is something that could be helpful. And also increasing lesson specificity. So kind of going back to something we talked about right at the beginning with Christy, and this is really mostly about those distractor images, which I think is one of the kind of playgrounds where there's so much to be brought to bear from digital. Selecting those distractors with a set of, even if you have 1,000 flashcards, like really specifically tailoring 5, 9 distractors.
Yeah, having to find the right distractor.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a nightmare to do. So it's currently something that's kind of weak on when you think about the physical lessons, physical flashcard lessons, and with an application, it can get very, very specific. So, say for instance, the conceptual component of apples that you're not grasping very well is that they can be red, yellow, or green, or a mix of colors. And so it might be the case that the distractors could be selected to really kind of help provide that context. Color is actually not the distinctive feature of the apple within reason. Like maybe you can't have a purple apple, but you kind of get the general idea is that with distractors, you can start to really.
You can have a yellow apple and a yellow banana.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. You can start to just kind of have those things that really kind of test the conceptual boundaries of different targets so that you can be a lot more specific and kind of thoughtful about that. And all the most recent research on DTT seems to suggest that to teach concepts, it is really important to teach those distinctive features and be able to kind of have a map around what the concept of what we're trying to teach is. And I think that's one of the things that's hard to do with cards that will be really easy to do with an application. And of course, we have some great components for that already, but that's a place where I think that there's going to be a lot of growth and will really increase the efficacy of the learning by being able to respond much more closely to the exact areas of conceptual misunderstanding, as opposed to taking a bit more of like a brute force approach where like, well, if we just do this 100 times, then of course, we'll figure something out, which is, sort of the direction that sometimes things go if you don't have as much access to those distractors to really kind of tailor the picture.
Yeah. I don't see anything on here about AI.
Yeah. So,
and to me, like images in an order, trying to find other things that are also the same color, maybe the same shape, things like that. Like to me, that totally lends itself to AI. Is that something that's gone through your brain at all?
Oh yeah. We have we have some pretty solid AI plans, but I didn't want to kind of mention anything that wasn't really going to happen for sure in the specific way that we mentioned it here. So we've been working on some exciting AI plans, both to really just to make the whole application smarter. A lot of this can be done algorithmically. So something where I think a lot of the time people, sort of if you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I think there are some situations where AI isn't actually the most efficient way to solve some problems, but in this case, there are, as you've identified, lots and lots of ways that kind of small applications of AI could really upgrade the kind of decision-making support and just the being able to respond to the data kind of immediately. So definitely on our general roadmap, but the specific plans are a little bit ambiguous right now.
Yeah, those are my favorite kinds. But yeah, I mean, you're collecting all the data, right? And you're seeing all the progress across all these organizations. So the thing about like suggesting things, right? Like we were talking about that back 9 years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. Because there was just so much data coming in that we said, man, like, why can't we just say, hey, based off of the last 50 data points, we see a trend that looks similar to these other
we see
3,000 trends,
all this stuff, that you only see your center.
And you could say something like we've seen an intervention of this kind prove 70%, you kind of want to, it's a gray area, right? Because you don't want to be giving out.
You're right. Yeah. Like treatment
advice, right? Because then I think you kind of step into the medical device area once you start doing that.
Right.
But providing insights and data.
That's and I think that's like a really interesting way to think about it is like there's you can help people a lot in just analyzing data live for them basically. And that, obviously that information might be distilled in such a way that they might make decisions based off of that, but that's not the same thing.
Right.
Like, this is what you should certainly do. It's more of like you're in the middle of this DTT lesson and, based on what we're seeing here, like this could be a really interesting direction to take. And it might be hard for you to do that analysis on the fly. So I think there's a lot of potential for things like that where, just kind of leveraging big data and trends that are available and just kind of being able to alert people of those trends that, that are known in general. So you can kind of make good decisions based off of that.
Yeah. So this has been really great. I love, yeah, there you go. No, this has been really cool to see what you guys are working on. You did mention that you maybe wanted to talk about like maybe your mission or your values. Do you want to throw that in there?
Sure. Yeah. So our ethos is really about balancing the kind of personalization and the kind of the beautiful things about ABA. And I like to think a lot about the personability of ABA, where there's, a person there, and that's just a huge component of what makes ABA special and impactful, with the kind of ability of technology to make things more efficient and kind of streamline the field, make it possible to move towards value-based care. So we're really focused on kind of trying to keep both of those things top of mind all the time, and making sure that the things that we're building are really thoughtful and support clinicians in doing the work that they do without sort of taking away some of those personalization components, because as we all know, you get more efficient, but then things get worse. You actually haven't gotten more efficient, you've just gotten worse. So our real focus is on balancing that kind of richness of DTT and the customization of DTT and the kind of power of that framework, with the need to maintain that personal touch and the ability to kind of tailor things for a specific learner, which really drives that pedagogy forward. So our ethos is really about kind of the intersection of those two things, which is always kind of an interesting interplay where, if you typically those two things are sort of at odds, but our hope is to kind of marry those two things a little bit more closely, so that you can start to get those benefits of digitization without sort of moving in the wrong direction when it comes to personalization and controls. And so we're really present in the community, and everything we build is based on community feedback. One thing we're proud of is that we have not originated a single feature idea since the launch of our beta. Every single feature that's ever been added to the app has been added directly by consensus feedback by BCBAs. We started off with a really large beta of about 1,000 BCBAs who provided like that kind of foundational feedback. And now we build everything based off of requests from centers who are using the application that are common across a number of centers. So we're really focused on not trying to, kind of originate things and instead capturing kind of like the collective intelligence of this field and doing things that, will help a lot of people based on what they really think that they need, as opposed to, sort of making stuff up and being like, I think that BCBAs will love this. So that's kind of our design philosophy as well.
And it's not, I mean, in a way, it seems like all of these technologies are really new, but they're not. I mean, Skinner, had the technology of teaching and teaching machines way back in the day.
Yeah.
So just, we're moving along the spectrum of what we can use in terms of teaching machines.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a cool way to look at it, where, we just have better tools.
I think sometimes we forget that Skinner did that.
Yeah. He was the original pioneer. All right. Well, thanks. I really appreciate your time. This has been really great learning about FirstWork. Obviously, your website's up on the screen. Go check it out if you want to learn more. Christy, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I just, hope everybody enjoyed the presentation. We want everybody to remember to mark their calendars for November 7th. That's next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. No, it'll be Eastern Standard Time by then. Oh my, right. Daylight savings coming up 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when we're going to host a CEU webinar with May Bobrin called Culturally Responsive Behavior Management. So I hope everybody can make it. You can register now through Behavior Live. But thank you, Patrick. This was great. Really enjoyed. And I got to stay on and hang. That was fun.
No, it's been an absolutely wonderful opportunity to get to chat with you all and share a little bit about this. And I love the culture and the work you're doing at Motivity. So fantastic to get a chance to collaborate here.
Thank you very much.